This is episode 79 of Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. We're going to have a conversation with Mike Shipley, and stay tuned for a bonus episode, a full episode, episode 80, coming out tomorrow, Monday, the day after Easter. Before we jump into today's show, let me remind you that the Dank Podstash is officially sponsored by Anarchy Lifting. It's time to get hashtag Boogaloo ready and in fighting shape. Now of all times, you should be on that. Let's get on it. Greg Papanicholas is going to get you there with personalized meal plans, training, group support, and tons of amazing fitness and motivational resources and knowledge, including the Project Sparta Facebook group. You can go to anarchyliftingcoach.com and learn more about Greg's work. When you're ready to get signed up and get fit, go to gregpapanicholas.clickfunnels.com/opt-in and get started on your path to health. Those links will be in the description, and Greg is working on consolidating these URLs for an easier time. I will let you know when that happens. I was in Project Sparta. I'm down some weight, feeling great, strong, and loving his personalized menu and workouts. Time is now to do this, and it's hard, I know, because there's no gyms. The gyms are all closed, but Greg is going to hook you up with home workouts to keep it going. So when you're ready, get to anarchyliftingcoach.com and get after it. We also have a special offer, for our listeners from friend of the show, author and content creator Shane Radliff of Liberty Under Attack Publications. You can take 10% off your order by using coupon code DANK10, that's DANK10. Just go to libertyunderattack.com. They have books focusing on self-liberation, freedom strategies, solutions, and more. Current books include Hashtag Agora, Second Realm Book on Strategy, Ben Stone's Sedition, Subversion, and Sabotage, and Shane's very own Vanu, a strategy for self-liberation. They also offer assistance to new authors throughout the publishing process, including editing, proofreading, formatting for Kindle and paperback, and full-service audiobook production. That's Liberty Under Attack Publications. Share your story, find your freedom. Special shout-out to Voluntary Apothecary. Voluntary Apothecary was kind enough to send me a sample care package full of awesome beard care products, including beard oil, mustache wax, combs, and more. You can check out their amazing products at tashtamer.com and voluntaryapothecary.com. Be sure to check the episode description for those links. And now, without further ado, episode 79 of the Dank Podstash is coming at you.
Enemy of the state.
An enemy of the state.
Enemy of the state.
Dank Podstash.
You're listening to Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. Check out thedankpodstash.com to find every episode of the Dank Podstash, links to support the show via our BitBacker and Patreon, Dank Podstash merchandise, and much more. If you'd like to advertise on the Dank Podstash, email us at dankpodstash@gmail.com.
Zombie presidents! What anarchy! Zombie presidents!
Welcome to another episode of Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. I'm your host, NonVotingNick, and I'm here with Mike Shipley. How's it going, Mike?
Fantastic. Great to be
Awesome.
here. Thanks.
Yeah, glad to have you on. We've tried to get this together for a bit, and we finally were able to sync up schedules, so it's going to be hopefully a great conversation. So,
Hey, looking forward to it.
how I usually start out, I just want to ask, do you consider yourself an anarchist or a libertarian, as in Libertarian Party, and how did you get there?
I identify as an anarchist. I am active in the Libertarian Party. How I got here, the really short version of that story is Ron Paul. And then the longer version of how I got here is all the problematic aspects of Ron Paul that you learn after the fact. Actually, my first big responsibility in the Libertarian Party was to chair its Gender and Sexual Minority Caucus. So my job in that, it's not a paid role, of course, but my responsibility was to figure out how to get the message of liberty to gender and sexual minority people who are predominantly Democrats. And when I really set my mind to, solving that problem, I discovered that there are a lot of really cringy narratives floating around inside the party. And that led me to looking deeper into libertarian theory and finding narratives and, logic that would help me unpack all of that. And the more I dug, the more I found my way towards actual anarchism. And here I am.
Nice. So how do you distinguish, I guess, how do you define being an anarchist in the Libertarian Party? Because that seems to be a point of contention between a lot of anarchists and Libertarian Party goers. And I've had those arguments with people myself. I've recently just kind of given up on it because, like you said, your job was reaching out to, say, Democrats or whatever to get them away from that and towards a more freedom-oriented mindset. And I can see the use of that. But a lot of people have a problem with people in the Libertarian Party calling themselves anarchists and whatnot. So tell me what you think about that.
Sure. I can only tell you how I think about it. Because it is a sort of abstract space to kind of hold, I suppose, two maybe paradigms in mind at once. But for me, I look at it as kind of like harm reduction, right? So we're living under this monstrous, brutal empire. And the only way out of it is to kind of, for enough people to have a mass kind of awakening and choose to take responsibility for their own lives, to believe in themselves instead of authority. And that difficult work is a long-term project, and it requires, at least in my opinion, kind of everybody figuring out not only how to meet their neighbors where they're at, but where they're comfortable fitting in. So there's actually a lot of really important mutual aid work out there going on, people using direct action to build stateless alternatives in their communities. And that work is like really the most important. Like the state is never going to set us free. But I question this logic where like there's this one idea that like the only pathway to freedom is some kind of a violent revolution that tears down the state. And I kind of reject the idea. Marx is not a fortune teller. He made some interesting observations about the world, as many thinkers have. But I don't see any reason to believe that like revolution has to happen, or even that it's really likely to yield a world set free if it did, right? So when I put that idea aside and I think about, is it possible for humanity to sort of responsibly move toward a stateless society? What would it look like if we built up alternatives as we scaled back the state? Is it a utopian pipe dream that government would wither away, or whatever you want to call it? Maybe, but it's all a utopian pipe dream if you want to, dismiss it. But I think part of the hope that's contained in anarchism is that it's not a utopian pipe dream. Humanity actually can rise above our barbaric roots and this tendency to use violence to get what we want. Like, that's the entire challenge. So, for me, I guess to circle back to the question, it's about harm reduction. It's about taking responsibility for imagining a path to anarchism that is, I suppose, as non-bloody as possible, that harms as few vulnerable people as possible, and that gives as many people as possible a chance to have that awakening that is so necessary, and time for those institutions, those direct action alternatives to be built up.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of that trope, the 6-month plan. You become a libertarian, and in 6 months you're an anarchist. And some good friends of mine that work with the Libertarian Party have described it as a pipeline from statism to anarchy, which I think is a really good way to describe it. But some people do get hung up in the, running serious candidates and the actual politics.
Sure. Speaking of candidates, that's kind of part of my maybe critique of the party. I just feel like like people instinctively know, even if they don't have any theory, they understand that like something's wrong. They're filled with anxieties about, I'm not happy with these politicians, right? And they're looking for alternatives. And I just feel like what's behind that instinctively is that people know that our political systems are a life or death matter, right? Like government is making lives end early every single day. And even if they don't have that like sort of biting vocabulary to express that critique, my point is we instinctively know this. So if a libertarian candidate gets on there and they're like, abolish the Department of Education. Okay, like, yeah, but also, how am I going to educate my child, right? Like, what's the alternative? And of course, anarchists are really strong on saying, well, digital tools are making distance learning. It's been free for years now, actually. We can do community, teach-ins. People can share knowledge. There are all kinds of ways that people can give knowledge directly to each other that don't involve the state, right? So if a candidate, let's say, if I'm like a mainstream person and I'm listening to a candidate and I have an incoherent idea that like my life is at stake right now, education is probably a bad example because it's less life or death than other people, but just roll with it.
Sure.
If I hear abolish the Department of Ed, or I hear look at all these really exciting mutual aid, look at all these, free schools that have been popping up everywhere, I might be more willing to trust this one and then go use my vote to dismantle the state, right? So I think too often, especially, I don't want to shame any particular faction. I'll call them the moderates without throwing shade. I actually have allies that I consider moderates that I consider allies, but just roll with it. People that are kind of comfortable with the state and are just willing to say, oh, department, you get my point, right?
Yeah.
I need more coffee.
Yeah. Have at it. No, I get what you're saying. And it's interesting, especially with everything going on right now with the lockdowns in different states and whatnot, and schools being closed for the rest of the year, how quickly people are having to find ways to do this. The state education facilities themselves, because they're struggling to figure out how to do these electronic meetings and all that stuff that they were not prepared at all to do. And people are having success, and they're also failing in massive swaths as far as educating their children without sending them to a school, among other things, meals and whatnot. That's the really sad part of it. And I think there's a lot of missed opportunities from anarchists and libertarians right now to focus on, like what you're saying, and presenting that mutual aid and other better options rather than saying, see, I told you so, or look at how shitty it is.
Yeah, I think you're really onto something with that. And I think it highlights the importance of the anarchist narrative. Like there's this tendency, especially for the moderates, to dismiss the anarchists as dreamers or just impractical, that we're just off on some sort of like weird idealist plantation and not doing anything relevant. And no, I think it's so important to like reclaim the fact that like, no, that is the meat and potatoes of a world set free. If you're not building up what that alternative looks like, then there's nothing left when the system falls. And we found that out right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, things are getting.
It was like we're running around like mutual aid's the answer. Contact your neighbors, and like we still really haven't even. I don't know how to explain this. This is terrible, but I don't talk to my neighbors either. I'm kind of like, I don't know. I'm not going to call myself a misanthropist. Like I don't hate people, but I'm not super like lovey with people I don't know either.
Right.
And I think some of that conditioning is just the way that modern life is so fast, and we compartmentalize our work and our volunteerism and our family life, and we don't really like nurture lasting relationships with people that we don't need
Sure. And
in our everyday lives. And
Yeah, just
Go ahead.
because someone's your neighbor doesn't mean you have to like them either. There's going to be plenty of cases, especially in this day and age, with larger communities and with people who are not statists, not meshing with their neighbors who are statists. There's property disputes, all kinds of stuff, and we may find ourselves with the things going on now and the horrible problems that will result from this, being forced to associate with them, whether we like it or not, and hopefully finding common ground because of that, like finding a middle ground to where we don't have to hate neighbors because of their statism or whatever. That's my hope, at least.
Right. That's an interesting thought. I almost feel like, I mean, it's an interesting thought. Like, I'm picturing my neighbors, some of my different neighbors, and very few of them I can picture being politically aware. Like, I see them when I drive by and I wave. And I wonder if like not actually being steeped in ideology might be a benefit for them, because like when they have to figure out something new, they'll just do it without being like, is this the, is this, I don't know.
Is this
I'm
what Trump would do?
Without having thought of that.
Should I be doing this? But yeah.
Right.
And yeah,
right. Is this conservative enough? Is this social justice enough, or whatever it is?
Yeah, because circumstances
they're going to be like,
are gonna
barbecue coming over.
Yeah, circumstances are going to force people into black and gray markets, and already have right now, which is really interesting. And you see a lot of people saying, "Oh fuck, I might get caught doing this, but what else am I going to do to keep my business up or to eat and whatnot?" And there's a degree of separation with neighbors where I'm at, kind of out in the country, because there's a whole bunch of acreage between us, and we like our privacy, so we don't get together for a lot of stuff. You see, like you said, you drive by and you wave, or package gets delivered to your house and it's supposed to go to theirs, you take it and drop it off, but we're not barbecuing every weekend or anything like that. But it's even good to have that small amount of interaction in the case that you will have to maybe barbecue or garden with them or whatever later.
Right. Absolutely. 100% agree.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping for that positive outcome from all of this. I think it's going to be really rough, and it already is really rough on a lot of people. And the thing that bothers me the most right now is what they're calling the quarantine Karens, the people, reporting people for gatherings or being out, and, the paddleboarder who got arrested for paddleboarding out in the middle of the fucking ocean and then came in close contact with the cops who arrested him for not social distancing. It's just ridiculous. That's something we're going to have to overcome.
Right. This has been such an interesting conversation too, because I think it's Bakunin who has this quote about, like, in matters of boot making, defer to the bootmaker. So it's like this idea that even though as anarchists we reject, hierarchy or, unjust authority, we trust experts, right? So a politician using a pandemic as an excuse to implement a lockdown is different than an epidemiologist who's telling us, hey, this thing is spiraling, maybe we should distance, right? And if I'm going to listen to this one, I might voluntarily reduce my activity. I might voluntarily use a mask, and it's probably responsible if I do. And then simultaneously, we had the very real impulse to reject the coercive authority of the state in attempting to mandate these distancing. And those two conversations have been in tension, and a really interesting conversation unfolding from that.
Right. Yeah, it's I had a discussion with Isaac Lindeberger about that, and that's an episode that's going to come out after this one. And it's the whole, if the government says it's bad, I'm not going to do it. It's like, well, there's some gray area here. Just because government is saying it does not mean it's coming from a place of knowledge or logic. And, government says don't murder each other, and anarchists aren't running out and murdering people just because the government says not to.
Right. And, now that you think about it, there's kind of like an almost like a cosmic sort of, I don't know if you want to, but like I don't even know what they're like, a paradox, right?
Okay.
Because the tools we would use to like protest would be some kind of a mass demonstration. At least those are the analog tools from the old world. And if we're going to like responsibly distance, then I'm voluntarily taking that tool off the table. Well, now what do? We're kind of in the same boat as parents who are suddenly figuring out how to educate their kid, except our job is to figure out how to create a mass movement without actually demonstrating on the streets. And I'm not sure I really resolved that for myself. Like I've been refraining from overemphasizing the injustice right now because I don't want to fuel, I guess, a sense of rage that no one can do anything with, because I know people are trapped in their homes with their families and that could turn ugly for everyone, you know? But I'm not sure what is the digital equivalent of a mass demonstration, and can we figure that out? Or is a demonstration really not even the most effective way to say, hey, this is really unconstitutional? Not that I worship this document, but like, it says that for a reason.
Right.
It says that for a fucking reason. What are we going to do to address that?
I don't know that there's a digital answer, especially with the amount of control that the state has over digital spaces. And what is it called? I think the Earn It Act, where they're trying to end end-to-end encrypted messaging, those apps and whatnot. So they're trying to even crack down on things like that. I have seen people that are going out and gathering, like today in Idaho. Ammon Bundy is planning on having 500 to 1,000 people for their Easter service, and demonstrating their freedom of religion and assembly. And it's a weird thing because, like you said, if you're worried about contracting the virus or spreading it to others, then you can voluntarily stay away from other people, social distance, whatever you like. If you're doing what they're doing, they're voluntarily gathering there. And I don't see a problem with that if they're spreading it to themselves and not spreading it to others. If they are even spreading it, who knows? Another interesting tactic that I've seen pop up is now that they're making wearing masks and gloves mandatory in a lot of places. It's funny because there's anti-mask laws in a lot of places where they're now making masks mandatory, but it's an option for some guerrilla tactics as far as illegal activities and just disobeying in general. So because you're not going to get identified.
Right. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, so there's this idea of diversity of tactics. Like, even though for me, I wouldn't probably go to a large gathering, but I'm not going to go out of my way to like shame people who feel like that's the right move for them, especially on a major religious holiday. Like, I don't know, something just makes me feel gross that I would shame people for choosing to.
Sure.
But with that said, I don't know. Honestly, I've just been at my desk. For me, the other thing is, as I work out of my home, I don't have much human contact anyway. I've been using digital tools for a while. I use Zoom for my activism. I didn't notice much of a difference either. So in a way, like, part of me, I think, might not be feeling the sense of urgency simply because it wasn't a dramatic change for me. And there might be some of that going on too.
I get that for sure, because I'm near Spokane, Washington, and driving in town to get stuff for chickens or whatever I need to get that I can't get out at the country stores here, surprisingly, because it's for chickens. But yeah, see just tons of people out on bike rides and walking their dogs and stuff, and no one's getting in big packs and walking around, but there's tons of traffic. And the only disruptions I'm seeing are like restaurants that are only takeout or delivery, some lines around Walmart to get in because they're only letting certain amounts of people in and the social distancing and whatnot. But then the signs over the freeways and the roadways, those electronic signs you see that they program different messages into, are saying, great job social distancing, stay home Washington, you're doing good, all that stuff. And it's just like you see that, and then you see tons of people out and about in the beautiful beginnings of spring weather. And I'm not seeing a drastic, change in stuff either. It's really interesting, but I'm not at an epicenter like New York or something like that. And that being said, there's places that are really not being hit very hard that have even more draconian measures in place than the places that are being hit hard. So I can understand a lot of people's suspicions and their real need to disobey because of that. And I think that's fine. I just think you have to take your safety, and if you're going to be a responsible person, let alone anarchist, other people's safety into account.
Right. That I think that's important to circle back to that a world set free is not one where we get to outsource responsibility for things, or, the sort of the labor of balancing all the different choices and choosing the wisest one, right? Like, we have to do that labor ourselves in order to, replace the systems that currently purport to do all that for us. So there's something to be said for like actually taking that responsibility and then wisely choosing to whatever you think is the best thing. But for me, I'm doing, how do I put it? Like, there is political systems do abuse scientific knowledge. And there are scientific people who allow their narratives to become abused. But with that being said, the critique of that is a political one. It doesn't discredit science, if that makes sense. It discredits politics. It doesn't discredit every piece of scientific speech that exists. So if I'm able to separate this and listen to what's being said, and they're going, no, this is different. This is big. It's not just like the flu. It's possible to like discern that distinctly from the political system. And that is such a nuanced awareness. I think it's kind of like, in a way, it's helping me see like how far we still have to go.
Right.
Watching people kind of grapple with the nuance there and unpacking the difference, or maybe unsuccessfully falling into the trap of conflating those things and then reacting to them both, or whatever. So here we are, trapped in our homes, staring at the internet and watching everybody trying not to descend into, despair that this is where humanity's at right now. And anarchism, I think, for me, is always about recognizing where people are at and meeting them there. This is where they're at right now.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And it's balance in all things. We got to find the balance between being trapped in our homes and what we need. And if that means going out, or even if we're working in an agorist sense, it's a perfect time for gray and black markets as well. And that might mean getting out of your home. But being responsible with your contact if you feel that COVID-19 or whatever is a threat. I did want to touch on something that you just said. We have a long way to go, and then circle back to something you said before about violent revolutions not necessarily being the path to freedom. And I don't think aggressive violent revolutions are a path to freedom, because I think that will lead to installation of another government of whatever type. But I talk about the Boogaloo on the show and online quite a bit. I don't see a lot of left-leaning anarchists or libertarians represented in the Boogaloo movement, but there are some out there. And, left anarchists have been historically radically violent revolutionaries. I don't see the Boogaloo as an assault on government. I see it as government bringing the fight to people, or pushing them to where they can't do anything but fight back to stay alive. So where do you see that with all of this that's going on right now?
I think I'm going to answer maybe by drawing a parallel to the way we weigh our options and make the choice that is most wise for us, right? Like there are people having giant Easter celebrations today, right? And that's what made sense to them. And I think the same thing about the choice to engage in revolutionary violence, right? Because at some point, humanity is caught in this cycle. We see these, you know, revolutions or uprisings, and you know, the cycle begins again. They institute a new thing, and sometimes it's even a leap forward, like we saw during the Enlightenment with the, you know, the classical liberal revolutions. You know, and but it's still a cycle, right? So in a way, for me, the presence of a revolution indicates a beginning of a new cycle. And like by the time that happens, like you've already lost. You missed the boat. Sorry, we didn't build a world set free in time. The cycle is going to reset. So I think for me, I take away like we might miss the boat this time. The cycle might, I mean, for all I know, it's already too late. I don't know. I know for me, I still feel like there's hope, and I'm still, you know, doing my activism and my ideological work. But I think everyone's going to decide that point has been reached at a different moment. If we're looking in the purely principled sense, the government has been violating, like initiating coercive force of fraud against all of us for a very long time. Technically, revolutionary violence is already justified, like it's defensive already. So I guess coming back to diversity of tactics, I'm not going to try to blame or shame or get in anyone else's way for making the decision that feels right to them. I can say that I'm not there yet. But I recognize that a tipping point, it feels like one could be in the air, and, you know, none of us is going to know till it suddenly that first shot is fired and all hell breaks loose. And at that point, hopefully you know how to shoot and you have access to something you can shoot.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
What else can I say?
Well, and there's a lot of people preparing for that eventuality, but we can also see how unprepared a lot of people are with some of the incidents, like in New York, the Whiskey Warrior 556, the guy who was red flagged and surrounded in his home, and that there's just no communication between anybody who says they're ready for the Boogaloo. It was just broken down to a bunch of chaos, and that seems to continually happen. Right. And the emphasis in the Boogaloo community lately has been on making your groups in your immediate area, because getting online and saying, you look, I'm in trouble, the cops are around my house, if you don't have somebody to be there to help you out like that, you're going to have to stay there for hours if you can, or they're just going to get you, because people are hours away, states away even. And I think that mindset ties in perfectly with the idea of community in general and mutual aid. And it's getting to know your community around you, not necessarily your neighbors, but the people that you want to be a part of your community.
Right. Right. You know, so a lot of the mutual, I'm feeling a little convicted because I was like confessing earlier that I don't know my neighbors, but I do mutual aid work in the addiction recovery community. So I guess what you're saying to me makes me think about, and I'm just going to, you didn't really ask a question or like, I don't know. So I'm just going to stream of consciousness, because it was interesting for me watching how recovery groups handled the question of whether we should continue meeting or not, because those meetings that get held are such an important way, important part of how we connect with people in early recovery. It's how they get connected with people who have been in recovery for a while, and we share, you know, the knowledge that we have and the sort of coping tactics that we use to stay healthy. And it was really kind of it distressed a lot of people in recovery spaces, because that sort of responsibility or like compassion for the newcomer, like that desire to pass on this sense of freedom that we have, it's a very real part of how we stay healthy, and having that taken away, it was like it doesn't just like it harms all of us. There's this fear almost that like we're all going to get sick again because we don't have the networks. And what happened though is that like Zoom became a thing, and suddenly all these people are like, I don't want to get like too into like, but I'm just this is one of my character liabilities, is that like I have a really low patience for people that don't can't figure out how to do a Zoom call, or like,
Okay.
you know, they don't use their digital calendar or whatever. Like, it's fucking 2020. Like, fucking learn how to use your fucking device. And like, so I've been preaching digital meetings for like years, and it was really kind of like just beautiful to watch people finally like discover that those tools were available. And this isn't even limited to recovery. We've been watching like churches, for instance, or you know, the Libertarian Party, and it's never been a lot of anarchists have been using digital tools for quite a while now. Like, I think it's part of why we've been able to be so strong. But yeah, there were interesting conversations because different groups were making different decisions. Like, some of them decided to move to a public park and bring lawn chairs and sit 6 feet apart from each other and continue holding meetings. And all of a sudden they were being approached by other people at the park who came to sit in their meeting. And I think for me, it was interesting to kind of watch the way, I mean, for lack of a better term, that invisible hand, using the marketplace of recovery or whatever to meet different needs. Like, we actually were able to connect with addicts that we had not been previously connecting with. And then other people were able to discover digital tools that they were never comfortable with before. And that allowed people in their, you know, transitional homes to attend these digital meetings that had previously been slacking off, kind of thing. And I don't know, it's just really, I think actually I want to circle back maybe
Sure.
because I reminded myself when I heard you say agorism that there's another aspect of, I think, what's going on with everyone home from work. The longer this goes on, and speaking of the sort of quote invisible hand or whatever, people are going to find ways to get online and use those drop shipping companies to sell each other t-shirts, or they're going to, you know, figure out that they had a secret talent for being a cam model, or, you know, they've got time to play around with Photoshop and they discover that they're a graphic designer, or they realize that WordPress is like, it's almost as easy as like customizing your MySpace page at this point. Like, poof, now I'm a web designer. But the point is, like, people are going to, like, I feel like a lot of these giant like corporate entities are not going to get back all of the same workers that were laid off, because people are going to find different ways to make money, and they're not going to want to go back to the wage system.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that would be a really great outcome of that as well, if people were more independent with their income. And out of a lot of depressions or recessions come a lot of interesting new market ideas and businesses, and what they're born from necessity. So hopefully we see a lot of that as well. I'm just hoping on top of that it can stay in a more agorist space rather than caving to government demands or government not letting go of things that they've implemented already now. That's the bit, one of the scariest parts to me.
Sure.
Because they have just such a hand in business right now, you know, forcing closures other than like for restaurants, other than takeout and delivery and whatnot. And we're already seeing the for me but not for thee attitude that they have with them bringing barbers to police stations, or I think it was the mayor or the governor of Michigan defending going to a hairstylist when no one else can. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And that's the kind of stuff that people need to see, that we need to push partially during all this, so people realize, hey, wait a minute, this is bullshit. They're just doing whatever they want and I can't, and they're ruining my life.
Right. And kind of to piggyback on that double standard, or just that, like, the contradictions built into coercive systems. Like you talked about the masks. Oh, one day they're prohibited, the next day they're, required. Or like we see with food is an essential service, but apparently seeds are not. So you'll have grocery stores where you can buy food, but the seed aisle is blocked off and you can't purchase anything from that. So I can buy prepackaged food where people had to go to work to break social distancing to produce it, but I can't just get some seeds and go grow it by myself. Somehow that's a problem. And then, it's hard not to read into that they know there's a link between self-sufficiency and control, and I mean, is that just another one of their silly contradictions? Probably. It just wasn't well thought through, but it's difficult not to, I think if it was a big accident of incompetence, it won't be for long because they'll be like, oh, actually that works out well for us.
Right.
And,
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because that's one more inconsistency that I see near me. I have perfect access, just like I always have, to seeds and whatnot, because my wife and I garden, and we've gotten some seeds. We usually have a good store, but I've gotten out and supplemented the seeds that we need for this year. And I don't see any of the seed aisles shut down or being deemed non-essential at the places I've gone. But I have seen video from friends, and not just news report and whatnot, of that happening. And so that's another thing that kind of throws the wrench into that idea, I guess, that conspiracy of, is it trying to stymie independence so that we're being dependent on their packaged food and their production systems and whatnot. And I think, like you said, it's mostly incompetence. But just in the larger picture, the inconsistency from place to place is really, really messing with people, because people are out there trying to get the word out about what's going on in their area. And other people are saying, no, it's not happening here, but we're also seeing things come in waves. Like Canada is sending cops or Mounties, I guess, door to door to make sure that people are adhering to the enforced quarantine. I'm like, that's probably going to come to the U.S. And in some places, they're sending medical, liaisons or something accompanied by cops, I believe in Kentucky, door to door. And it's just so inconsistent. And I think, like you said, it's a lot of incompetence with the underlying authoritarianism and the plan of control. So it's hard to articulate that all in one flow because it is so inconsistent and confusing.
It is. And it's kind of like I waffle back and forth because I see the posts going around, and it's like, and I don't want to throw shade. Like, I don't want to shame people or make them feel bad, but like, so like I have a friend that works at a school, and he has to answer some parent communications, and there was this idea that the schools were being shut down so that they could install 5G like mind control devices on the campuses, and so they could control the young people and whatever. And I go back and forth between, okay, come on, to like trying to figure out what's going on is a rational response to be continuously gaslit. Sure. And constantly having authoritarian systems actually take, like, that's what it is to be in an abusive relationship, is to lose touch with kind of your own sense of sanity, your own sense of reality, and to start just really wildly second guessing your own perception, and to start getting farther and farther away from like a rational response to abuse, which is to exit the relationship. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, that's really how you end the abuse. Right. Not by guessing, he must just really love me. This is just how he shows his love, or whatever, you know what I mean? Or, she's just really, that's just how she is. Or, you know what I mean? Like making excuses for your abuser, or imagining things that aren't there. Oh, I'm sure, you know what I mean? Like, what is my point? I guess I waffle between like forgiveness and like annoyance with some of that, because it's like all this like swirling misinformation and like compounding the lies of the media. And like, granted, the corporate media is there to promote a narrative that serves the rulers. Like,
Right.
it's not even questionable. It doesn't require me to like imagine a whole bunch of extra stuff that's not there, but yet there's stuff that's actually behind the curtain, and that's real too. So I don't know if I have a point to make other than it's been another maddening thing to kind of be trapped at our desks watching it happen.
Right. Well, I can see a point coming from that of just being rational and looking at the what we know about, say, 5G, because that's what we brought up. You know, you can look up exactly what 5G is, and you can see that the frequencies have been being used since the 80s and a lot of different stuff. And I think you've talked to Jeremiah Harding on his show before. Yeah, he did a piece about 5G being used for surveillance and control. And I think that's probably the biggest threat from 5G rather than mind control and stuff. I don't really know how that would happen. So I'll point people there because I'm not super knowledgeable on it. Just the little bit that I've looked into it, there's definitely a rational space that you can exist in when you're thinking about it. So that's definitely something to think about rather than, you know, the 5G towers are putting out waves that are causing the bats to give everybody coronavirus. That's a little far out for me. So.
Right. Yes.
And
that actually comes back to almost like an LP thing inside the party. I guess this could be a broader movement thing too, but like sometimes the quote conspiracy people can be a little embarrassing. And some of it is even a vulnerability for these giant sort of, all the global bankers are Jews, and therefore like there's some really cringy and very dangerous ideas that can piggyback on that awareness. And like very rightfully, we want to be distanced from that. But then at the same time, someone who's like at least skeptical of the power structure, or who is at least unwilling to take it at face value, is someone who's like at least on the leading edge of maybe a more principled anti-authoritarian awakening. And there's such a double edge there, because I feel like the healthy thing to do is like try to supply them with like additional analysis rather than just sort of abandoning them to, you know, their fears and the misinformation. I mean, if we don't give them knowledge, Alex Jones will. So, I mean,
yeah, but you know, you can't deny the entertainment of the the videos people cut together of Alex Jones. I love that stuff. Just for the entertainment value.
It is. There's something to be said for the entertainment value of that.
He's been correct on some things too, but then he just gets wild. It's just one of my favorite things to do is his gay frogs impression, you know, like that's just wild. That's just, they're turning the friggin' frogs gay, you know, and it's just, come on, you're ruining your credibility.
Frogs gay.
Oh man, that's
right. Fun. That is hilarious.
So this conversation is going a lot faster than I thought it would. We're already at 45 minutes. I usually stay at an hour, so I want to jump to another topic before we get too far off the rails here. And that's bottom unity, because I've seen you talking about that online and with Jeremy and whatnot. And apparently I've learned that my idea of bottom unity is not very nuanced. I guess there's a more nuanced definition of bottom unity. I just think it's disregarding the superfluous to fight the state together. So tell us about bottom unity, what you know about it.
I think that would be a decent, that's a fair definition. The way I've been describing it lately, and this has evolved over time, is as a single issue alliance on anti-authoritarianism. So of course, anti-authoritarianism, what's that? Well, now I have to apply that to like every issue. So it's kind of a loophole to like, there's a broader set of ideas there. If so, being anti-authoritarian is distinct from just hating the state, right? Which doesn't mean that everyone is going to agree on which types of authority are just or unjust, but it does mean, for example, a border wall and your front door are not the same thing, right? So, and that there's a difference between, say, the revolutionary impulse that led to the Constitution versus fetishizing the Constitution as some kind of a glorious thing that must always exist, right? There are subtle differences between those points of view, and so on a case-by-case basis, there's an opportunity, I suppose, to educate people. But with that said, the reason I bring that up is because I ended up getting like, not attacked, I guess, but like put on the spot because people were they're using bot immunity as a weapon to like get you to co-sign ideas that aren't really anti-authoritarian or aren't really libertarian. And then, oh, I thought you were the bot immunity guy. And it's like, you know, the cool thing about bot immunity is that it's an expansive narrative. It encompasses as many anti-authoritarians as possible. And like you said, it asks us to kind of put aside the nuance, not put it aside per se, but to not make it a battleground, right? So whether I'm an agorist or, you know, an anarcho-communist or a syndicalist or an anarcho-capitalist, a mutualist, I mean, I could just like name, like there's so many variations of anarchist theory. Even like a staunch classical liberal or a Georgist, these are minarchist narratives, but when they're coming from an authentic, like anti-authoritarian place, like that's an ally to me, right? So it doesn't work. You just can't do like exclusionary labor with that. And what that means is when we have border authoritarians running around telling everybody that a border wall is just like your front door, bot immunity doesn't help me with accountability on that.
Okay.
So we use other tools like the non-aggression principle or something for that, which is really, really super long explanation that's really not part of the definition. It's more part of like the awareness that goes with it. That single issue alliance on anti-authoritarianism, I think, has for me been a way that I encapsulated it down to like, what is the essence? What is the thing we're unified around so that we can stay on the same page?
I like
together.
I like that single issue anti-authoritarianism, because yeah, it does come down to the fact that authority is not real. But the biggest quagmire I see in all this is generally socialist or communist versus capitalist or minarchist. It always comes down to those two economic groups fighting with each other. And I don't understand, maybe you have a perspective on this, why people pretend they can see the future where their hated economic system is going to try to oppress them. Why can't they exist separately and peacefully?
Sure. I mean, it almost comes back to a similar vibe to what I was saying with conspiracies, where I waffle between like forgiveness and annoyance. Because on one hand, the mainstream political spectrum has done this to us. They've used the public schools to condition us and indoctrinate us. And, you know, the corporate media has twisted language and the politicians have twisted language, and to benefit from this sort of good cop, bad cop thing, and this idea that there's like this sharp contrast. And, even the Cold War fueled this like giant clash of superpowers between capitalism and communism. And these two things were like good and evil and kind of archetyped in our minds that way. And so I go between, like, I understand that it takes years to really fully leave that behind. Like, when I hear language being used in a way that is not how I use language, it makes me cringe. Like listening to a staunch ANCAP and a staunch ANCOM describe their world set free, it is a completely different language. But like from the perspective of bottom unity, when I like take the loaded terms out of it and kind of translate it into what I'm really hearing, I'm not going to say it's identical, but it's a lot more similar than certainly our mainstream conditioning would like leave us with. Sure. Right? So like when I come into the party and I even smell, not the party, but the movement, sorry, I don't mean to be more anarchist on the show. When they come into our movement, let's say freedom spaces, and anything like smells even a tiny bit like donkey or elephant, like it's like full blown, oh my God, you're a Nazi. Oh my God, you're a commie. Like it just, that instinct is built into us, I guess is my point. Sure. So like, that's the forgiveness side. And then the annoyance part for me is like, when you explain this over and over and over again, like for left libertarians, private property is a legal term. So for us, rejecting private property means rejecting the legal controls over property and what counts as property. And that's why we call it personal property. So it's actually a defense of property, right? Oh my God, you have no idea how many times I had to explain it to like get it that simple, right? Sure. And then conversely, when you're talking to the other side, well, ANCAPs and other right libertarians retain the label private property for justly acquired, non-state sanctioned property. So you're telling these people, when you hear private property, they're not talking about the state sanctioned controls. Right. They're actually talking about, right? I shouldn't have to explain that like more than once, right?
Well, a lot of people need to hear it.
If I'm really engaging. Well, to the same person, I'll put it that way, okay. Right? And sometimes it's like you've explained it, and then I snap back into forgiveness, right? Because I fall into old speech patterns sometimes too. It depends on the audience, or if you're speaking to a mixed audience and you really can't win either way. So over time, I'm finding workarounds. Like I'll just say justly acquired property. Beautiful. And let you decide what you call that.
Nice.
And I know I always tell people like there's a vocabulary to this. And every time I try to sit down and like figure out which ones they are and like how I'm using it, I realize that like I don't have it memorized. It just comes in real time.
Sure.
And none of us are perfect, but I'm seeing other people go through an evolution too. Like there is a way to like be distinctly anti-authoritarian without having it be typed left or right. It just takes time to discover those like verbal workarounds.
Yeah, absolutely. That's excellent breakdown of it. And we've hit time, so let's call it a show. I really appreciate you coming on. That was a lot of fun. Great conversation. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Good luck in your next show later today, I think you said.
Yes. I'll be on Punk Rock Libertarians podcast at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Nice. Yeah. Good luck. Keep it calm, civil. You can do it. I got you. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Appreciate you listening to Enemy of the State's Dank Pod Stash. And remember, total freedom, no exceptions. Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash is sponsored by Anarchy Lifting. Go to anarchyliftingcoaching.com to learn more.
Zombie